Well, for those of us who are lucky enough to have a job, there are new numbers out today analyzing American workers. And according to the Labor Department, the average employed American works just over 2,000 hours per year. Excuse me, just about 40 hours a week. Now, the average yearly take-home just over $37,000. But also revealed in the data, the jobs that require far longer days and even night shifts, resulting in hundreds of extra hours worked. Think paramedic. Think truck driver, think retail manager at Bloomingdale's. And yet all too often, those are the jobs that also pay the least. Our next guest thinks we have to shift our view on economics because we're working harder and harder and getting less and less to show for it. And joining us now is Umair Haque, whose newest ebook, Betterness, Economics for Humans, details how and why we have to change not just our measure of economics, but our entire paradigm of what an economy means. And we were talking about this before. First of all, congratulations on the book, on this book, I should say.
Thank you.
Can you run a machine that you can't measure?
I think you get what you measure. And part of our problem is that we're measuring industrial age stuff. We're kind of like a Stone Age tribe that wants to leap into the Bronze Age. We're using yesterday's tools to do it. We don't have the right measurements, and we haven't had the right measurements for a long time. And part of the idea of betterness is if we want to build a meaningfully better economy, not just an economy that does what I call opulence, more, bigger, faster, cheaper, nastier, which is kind of what we spend our lives in pursuit of today. If we want to build a better economy, we're going to need to update our measures.
So give me, we've talked a little bit about GDP as a bad measure. Walk us through a couple of examples of the tools, of the Stone Age tools that we're using in this Bronze Age transition.
Well, I think the big one is GDP, and we've talked a little bit about its shortcomings before. Now, if I was to ask you a simple question, which is, Dylan, are you rich? You probably wouldn't confuse your income with your net worth, right?
That's right.
But what we do at a national level is make exactly that mistake. So the biggest problem with GDP, we've talked about it before in the sense that it undercounts some costs and overcounts some benefits, so it's kind of inaccurate. There's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that GDP is kind of an income statement for a country, for an economy. But it's not a statement of wealth. It's not a balance sheet. And so one of the big problems that we have, and I think it's the biggest problem we have in our economy, is that we don't have a balance sheet for our economy. So looking at GDP as a statement of income, we don't have a balance sheet to tell us what are our real assets. Are they growing? Are they in decline? Are they flatlining?
But isn't the balance sheet, as you put it, the wealth of the nation best measured through the absolute unemployment rate, hours worked, the average compensation, the percentage of the country in poverty?
Yes.
I mean, it's not like we don't have this data.
Exactly.
It's just that we just don't look at it like it's relevant to our economy, which strikes me as insane.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the idea of GDP for a second. We had a lot of the data that ended up going into GDP. But what we hadn't built, when GDP was built in the 1930s, was the actual synthesis, right? The creation of this one number. And so we have the data. You're right. It's floating around. And I would argue it goes far beyond things like unemployment rates. I would argue that it includes things like poverty rates. How connected are we as a society? Is our work really meaningful and engaging to us? Are we happier? Do we feel fulfilled? I would argue that a real balance sheet includes all of those things and more. And I think we have that stuff. But the real challenge for us is, can we synthesize it into a balance sheet and use that balance sheet to begin monitoring, measuring, and managing for a more meaningful kind of process?
Here's how I look at this, and you see it in television. So everybody knows the Nielsen ratings are completely wrong. They couldn't be more wrong. Right? At the same time, and they know with digital technology, you could take a discrete analysis of exactly how many people are watching this show or any other show that's ever been put on TV in a digital environment. But the power of the major networks who bill hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue against the bad data set, and the threat to that incumbent power of realizing that the data set you're billing against is wrong, and you may not be getting as much money. I think that exact same issue exists here, where if I go to a politician, if I go to President Obama, if I go to Mitt Romney or Newt Gingrich or whoever is going to run for the Republican president, and I say, the real data is 20% unemployment, the highest poverty level since the history of the census, a trade deficit that looks like this, all these things. The politicians would much rather point you to a slow-growing GDP number, which is really just slowly measuring the rate of extraction. It's saying, yeah, we're sucking your blood again, so you should feel better about that. And as a result, neither the media nor the political apparatus has any interest in making the transition you're talking about.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's nothing more fundamentally disruptive to the status quo than a new reality. And that's what we're talking about constructing here, a reality that is more in touch with kind of people's everyday reality. Now, the good part is that we don't...
Is that a new reality, or are we just getting rid of a fantasy?
I think we're getting closer to what you might call reality itself, not just kind of the institutionally created reality that we're taught exists. I think the good part is that we don't necessarily need to look to Washington to build this stuff anymore, right? We can do it. We can do it. We, at my think tank, we have spent the last year trying to do it. And one of the things that we found is that when we build a balance sheet for this country, we get a very different picture than when we look at GDP. Our balance sheet suggests that real wealth in America peaked around 1970. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who watches your show and knows that real incomes have declined and poverty's gone up and all of these things have happened. So we don't need the institutions to do it for us anymore. We can take on the challenge ourselves. And
so the last issue is, how do you deal with a population desperate to get doped up on hopium so that they don't have to deal with the unpleasant realities that you and I might discuss?
Totally. Listen, it's one thing to build a new set of measures to gauge the health of an economy, but it's another thing to change our lifestyles. And I think these things are interdependent. I think that if we were able to build these measures, people would be able to see their lives in a very different way. And they might be able to take a quantum leap much more easily. So I think the two kind of go hand in hand. But what is for sure is that we cannot build a measure and hope for it to result in much unless people also take a quantum leap in terms of actually changing their own lives.
Absolutely, Umair. It's great to see you, and I hope to see more of you in the new year.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right, Umair Haque. Betterness is the book. Economics for Humans. Check it out. I know it's one of the things that I will be reading over the Christmas holidays. We've got much more with Umair coming up on the website. Another Greedy Bastards antidote. Capitalists who make versus capitalists who take. It's a original recording from the two of us, and one that if you haven't had a chance to listen to is worth a listen. DylanRatigan.com is where you find that. Coming up on Hardball here, Newt slipping in the polls as Mitt picks up more endorsements. A look at the GOP race with just T-minus 2 weeks until the Iowa caucuses. But first, Santa's sleigh. Kelly Goff with a rant about some lesser-known holiday horror classics.